One Saturday before noon, I woke up earlier than my husband James to prepare the bathroom and dinner. Today's meal was pizza toast, scrambled eggs, and salad. I hardly had to use a knife, and the scrambled eggs were easy enough to make in the microwave. In the meantime, James woke up on time and went to the shower first. As usual, he didn't even say good morning to me. Still, I couldn't bring myself to be sad about every little thing. I called my mother when James went to the bathroom, as I had promised the day before. On the third call, I got through to my mother's phone. "Oh, hello, Mom. You know." I told her that I had fallen down the stairs at the supermarket a while ago and had broken my right arm. I decided that I would only call her while James got up and took a shower. But I completely lost track of time and we talked. I was on the phone with my earphones in, so I didn't notice him coming out of the shower. And he didn't seem to think I was on the phone with earphones either.
Hey slave, don't ignore me. I want my lunch right now.
I finally realized after he yelled at me and punched me on my broken right arm. "Ouch! Don't do that! I'll get your food ready right away!" My smartphone and earphones tumbled to the floor. Even if I had tried to resist, there was no way I could have one with my strength, and the pain in my right arm from the blow was too intense for me to move.
Is it just time for lunch? Then I will join you.
Kenny, my father, appeared. "My name is Karen. I married James, a colleague of mine, 4 years ago and left the company to become a full-time housewife. James had a good reputation at the company for being kind. We had never really been involved in work, but we hit it off over drinks at the end of the year. We exchanged contact information at that time, and we started going out to dinner and going out together. He asked me to go out with him on the premise of marriage, and we started dating. In fact, he was a kind person when we started dating, and I immediately thought that I could marry him and create a warm family together. On Christmas night after dating for a year, he proposed to me and we successfully joined the marriage. Since then, we have remained a close couple, going on dates once a month. Before we got married, we had always said that we wanted at least 3 children. After 2 years of trying to conceive since we were married and settled down. Unfortunately, we were never blessed with children. After discussing the future with James, we decided to live on our own. However, that was the beginning of the wheels of our marriage turning a little out of place. James, who used to be so kind to me, has somehow changed. Not cold, but not kind either. He had wanted to have a child, but his dream was no longer fulfilled because of me. I was prepared for that. So I did not tell him about it. After a month or 2, I began to feel more and more that he was cold. He seemed to have no interest or concern for me, and he stopped caring or worrying about me. I noticed that the 2 of us don't go out together anymore at all. After another month, I decided that this was not going to work and that I needed to talk to James and set up a meeting. "If you have something to say to me, just say it. We are a couple, aren't we?" When I said that, all he said was, "No." If he said no, we couldn't discuss it any further. In the end, our discussion ended after less than 5 minutes. For the next 6 months or so, I lived my life according to his moods. However, his attitude did not change at all. On the contrary, it was getting worse. I knew that continuing to worry by myself would not solve anything. So I talked to my father and mother about it when I went to my parents' house to visit them alone. I'm so sorry that I couldn't make it happen when he originally said he wanted kids. But we still decided to live together, and all this time he's been acting that way. I sighed for the umpteenth time.
I guess it's taking him a little longer to accept it. Why don't you give him a little more time?
My father Kenny said. He continued by saying, he's a little sulky, a little jokingly.
Still, if anything else happens, you tell me right away.
And he took my side. It was a man's opinion, and I decided to wait and believe my father's story. I have even seen stories on the internet about people getting divorced because they couldn't have children. The story of the child is such a serious matter. But James has chosen to live with me. I went home with a positive attitude that things would work out in time. 2 more months passed from there. I began to think it was time for me to start working instead of being a stay-at-home wife. The reason I originally became a stay-at-home wife was because we were talking about kids, and now that that is no longer the case, there is no longer any reason to be a stay-at-home wife. And, to be honest, there were times when I found it boring to be home alone all the time. I also wanted to get out a little and meet people and get stimulated. The idea came to me, and at dinner that evening, I broached the subject with James. He reacted in a way I had not expected.
What? Work? You should take care of me when I come home after a long day at work. That's a fine job, too.
He was furious and went straight to his room. I sat there, unable to move for a while. I was surprised and, more importantly, scared. I had never seen him so angry. Was it such a bad thing that I told him I would work? Had I hurt his pride? Indeed, I can live without any problems with only James' income. That is why I became a full-time housewife. He might have been surprised to hear that I wanted to work now. I apologized at the door of his room. I'm sorry. I didn't think you would be so angry. It's not that I'm dissatisfied with you or anything. I simply wanted to work. I said so, but received no response. The room was locked and I could not get in. He would come out of his room tomorrow morning, so I cleaned up dinner today and went back to my room too. The next morning, James got up and started getting ready for work as usual. However, where he usually eats breakfast, he went to work that day without eating. Maybe he doesn't want to see me. He is the type of person who eats a hearty breakfast, so he probably stopped by a nearby convenience store to buy breakfast. I had prepared breakfast for him. Breakfast for 2 was lined up on the dining table. I ate my portion by myself and decided to eat the rest for lunch. When he came home, I would talk to him again, and I waited until the evening, doing my chores and thinking about how I would talk to James. James almost always finishes work on time and comes straight home. Of course, that day was no exception, and he came home at the usual time. "Hi, sweetheart." He didn't answer me when I said so. After a shower, he took a seat at the dining table. Apparently, he would be home for dinner. Good. I made sure I prepared properly. The two of us started eating dinner together, but James didn't say a word. I was about to continue our conversation from the previous day.
Stop talking about yesterday already.
He said and hit his fist on the desk as hard as he could. I heard a clank and a shaking of the plate, but fortunately it was not broken. He went to his room in the middle of dinner that day, too. The next day he started eating breakfast at home too. But since that day, I have not been able to talk to James about my desire to work. Before that, I couldn't even have a normal conversation with him. We are not a couple. We are just roommates. No, maybe even less than that. I have become like a servant, not even allowed to express my opinions to him. Then one day, while I was going grocery shopping as usual, I accidentally fell on the stairs. It had been years since I had fallen so hard. I quickly put my hand on the ground, and although I did not bleed anywhere, I felt a terrible shock. When I returned home after shopping, the pain in my right arm did not subside, so I immediately went to the hospital. I had an X-ray at the hospital and went for a checkup.
It's completely broken. It will take about 3 months to heal. It sometimes doesn't stick well, so don't push yourself too hard.
Even though I was told that, I still had to do my housework. After returning home from the hospital, I cleaned the bathroom with my dominant hand not working properly, cooked dinner, and waited for James to return home. I wondered if I could ask him to help me with the housework until I got better. I wonder if he'll be concerned. With these worries in my mind, I took a rest on the sofa. After about 10 minutes of rest, James came home from work.
Hi, dear.
I haven't heard him say hi, honey, 4 months now, even though I greeted him as such. He was like that, but this time he looked at my right arm for a moment. Then, after making a blatantly disgusted face, he headed for the living room without saying a word. As usual, he took off his suit and went to the shower. I prepared to eat dinner as soon as he came out. At the quiet dining table, I made up my mind and opened my mouth. I broke my right arm today, and the doctor told me to rest so that the bone will heal properly. So I was wondering if you could help me with the housework just until it heals. I put down my fork and squeezed my left hand as I spoke. Then James threw the fork in his hand onto the plate and made a noise. Then he sighed loudly.
Look, it was your carelessness that broke the bone, right? You should take responsibility for yourself.
With that, he sighed again and went to his room. It was no good. He didn't help me with my chores or even worry about me. I couldn't get anything more down my throat that day. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual, as it takes me a long time to get ready because of my broken dominant hand. Then I prepared James' suit and made breakfast. He woke up at the usual time, took a shower, ate his breakfast, cleaned himself up, and went to work without a word. I've gotten used to this life by now. Then I spent twice as much time as usual doing the day's chores. It was still extremely inconvenient that I couldn't use my dominant hand properly. But from the way he looked the day before, I knew that he would probably be angry if I didn't finish the chores before he got home, just as I had done before. The problem in doing housework with this arm was the cooking. A month ago, when I was a little under the weather and made a simple dinner, he was very angry with me. "You're making me eat this stuff." He would be furious if I didn't cook something decent this time, too. Moreover, the broken arm would take months to fully heal, unlike when I was just sick. I had to get through that time somehow. Okay, let's get into it. With a fake smile and a shout, I put some energy into myself. For the next week, I did housework with my left arm, which I was not used to keep James in a good mood. I forced myself to think positively that I was becoming two-handed thanks to this. I also tried to cook in a way that didn't make it look like I was cutting corners. It's been a week since I broke my right arm. It's only been a week, and I don't know why, but it made me sad. I was told that the vegetables I cut with my non-dominant left arm using a knife were not cut well and looked misshapen and tasteless. When I made a dish that looked easy to prepare, he got angry.
You are so lucky to be able to cut corners just because you have a broken arm.
On the day I was so engrossed in cooking that I forgot to prepare the bathroom.
I come home on time, so you can at least prepare the bathroom accordingly. You can't even cook well enough.
He cursed me. I'm doing such good housework even though I have an injury on my right arm. I guess I had accumulated a lot of experience, and I had reached the limit of living with him. Before going to sleep at night, I spontaneously burst into tears on my bed. I immediately contacted my mother, saying that I needed to talk to her. 5 minutes later, my mother replied, "Let's talk on the phone tomorrow." I decided that when I talked to my mother, I would first talk about my broken arm, rather than suddenly discussing the divorce. The next day was Saturday, and unfortunately James would be home all day. Since he and I have separate rooms, I might be able to call my mother in my room, but that would be a bit risky. If he happened to hear me when he passed by my room, or if he suddenly called me, I knew I would be in trouble. But if I suddenly told him the next day that I was going to my parents' house, I knew he would ask, "What's so urgent?" So I decided to call my mother during the time he showered twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. On Saturdays, his routine was to get up before noon and take a shower first. I told my mother I would call her at that time. And the next day, I woke up earlier than James and prepared the bathroom and breakfast. Breakfast that day was pizza toast, scrambled eggs, and salad. I could hardly use a knife, and the scrambled eggs were easy enough to make in the microwave. In the meantime, he woke up on time and headed straight for the shower. As usual, he didn't even say good morning to me. Still, I couldn't even bring myself to be sad about every little thing like that. I called my mother just as James went to the bathroom. On the third call, it connected. "Oh, hello, Mom? You know." I told her that I had broken my right arm. My mother had the call on speaker, and my father seemed to be listening to me with her next to me.
Anyway, I'm going over there to help you now, so you'll have to wait.
And with that, my father immediately went to get ready to come to our house. In fact, 2 years ago, my mother became ill and was left with numbness in her hands, making it impossible for her to do much housework. Suddenly, I remembered James from 2 years ago. James was still so kind back then.
Karen, you can put your mother before anything else right now. I'll do whatever I can to help.
He was the closest person to support me when I was unstable, right after my mother's illness was discovered. Just as he said, I'll do whatever I can do. James didn't look at me in disapproval when I suddenly said, I'm going to the hospital now, and he drove me there. He also took the initiative to do the housework instead of me going to the hospital. He also came to visit my mother regularly, and I remember that both my mother and father were quite happy to see him. When my mother was cured and discharged from the hospital, he was as relieved as if it were his own mother.
Good, I'm so glad.
And now, I don't even want to think about it anymore, that this has happened. After my mother was discharged from the hospital, my father, who had rarely done household chores, began to take the initiative in doing them, and over the course of a year, he finally became able to do a full range of them. I feel very fortunate that my father is willing to come to my house to do housework. When I visited my parents' house the other day, I was surprised to see him doing the housework even more efficiently than I had seen him do it before. However, I wasn't sure what James would say if I told him that my father would come and help me right away. Of course, I was grateful to have my father help me with the house. My parents' house was a 5-minute walk from here. He would be here in about 10 minutes, including getting ready to leave. As I expected, James would not be angry with me on the spot when my father arrived, but I did not know what he would say to me after he left.
Did you say something unnecessary to your father? Don't you think it's insane, no matter how much you want to call him suddenly?
He might yell at me. I was alone with my thoughts, but I thought in circles.
Karen, it's time for me to go.
My father said as he finished his preparations. I kept worrying by myself, and 5 minutes had passed in the blink of an eye. I didn't care about James anymore. I just put my own feelings of wanting to rely on my father first. Thank you. I'll be waiting for you. I decided to ask my father to come. I talked to my mother about my real life until my father arrived. I don't want to tell Dad just yet, but I'm kind of thinking that James and I might not get along. My mother kindly listened to my thoughts about divorcing James. I did not speak to her explicitly about his outburst. I don't know yet, but if we get divorced, can I stay with you for a while? I told her, almost in tears.
You can come home anytime you want.
I was on the phone with my earphones in, so I didn't notice James come out of the shower. I had decided that I would only call him while he was in the shower. And he didn't seem to think I was on the phone with earphones either.
Hey, slave, don't ignore me. Breakfast will be right up.
After he yelled at me and punched me on my broken right arm, I finally realized what was happening. The tears I had been crying earlier instantly receded. My smartphone and earphones fell to the floor. Ouch! Don't do that! I'll get breakfast ready in a minute! Even if I had tried to resist, there was no way I could have defeated him by force in the first place. And furthermore, I was unable to move due to the severe pain in my right arm where he had hit me.
Is it just time for breakfast? If so, I will join you.
Just then, my father entered the house with a duplicate key. When James and I got married and moved into this house, we had given each other duplicate keys to our parents' houses for emergency use. I didn't expect to use it for the first time in this situation. Anyway, it helped. With my father's arrival, James' violence and outbursts stopped. I could faintly hear my mother's voice through the earphones lying nearby. Sorry, it's okay. Dad is here," I managed to reply. James seemed to finally realize that I had been on the phone with my mother. He looked at me and my father alternately, and then, eventually, he seemed to get angry and shouted loudly.
"You set me up."
James was about to come at me again, but my father restrained him.
I didn't think you were the kind of person who would do such a thing. You and Karen will get a divorce and you will compensate her for the pain and suffering you have caused her.
My father said this and took me back to my parents' house. When I arrived home, my mother was waiting for me at the door and hugged me as soon as she saw me. At that moment, tears welled up. I was scared. It was so hard. My mother didn't say anything, just hugged me tightly and patted my head.
I'm sorry. I wish I could have noticed you earlier. Because of what I said to you that time when you came to our house for advice.
My father seemed to regret what he said to me at that time. Why don't you wait a little longer? He did nothing wrong. In fact, he helped me. I was able to contact my mother at the last minute because he had told me at that time that I should tell him immediately if anything else happened. It's not your fault, Dad. Thank you for helping me. I smiled and my father smiled too. Finally, I would be free from James. I had a family that cared about me like this. That day, I took a long bath, ate the dinner my father cooked, and went to bed after laughing with them. Later, in the presence of my parents, I filed for divorce settlement. My father witnessed James' violence toward me, and my mother heard his outbursts toward me over the phone. With such fine witnesses, he had no choice but to agree to the divorce. We filed for alimony, and the divorce was successfully finalized. In addition, he promised to sell his current house and move away from me, and to never get involved with me again. Since that day, the only time I have seen James was at the mediation. Once I had gone with my father to his house to pick up my belongings, but arranged not to see James at that time. After James confirmed that my belongings were gone, I witnessed him packing up his own belongings and leaving a week later. There was no hegemony behind his back at that time, and there was no sign of the man who had been such an abusive jerk to me. After I calmed down, I told my former coworkers, with whom I am still good friends, that I was divorced, and word quickly spread throughout the company, and James' reputation, which had been said to be so kind, was apparently ruined. He seems to have managed to stay with the company, but I don't know if he is doing well at work. It had been a week since I last saw James. I received a phone call from his parents. The content of the call was, "We would like to apologize to you once by ourselves." James was not coming with them. It was just his parents, so we agreed. We set a date and time for them to come to our house at a later date and time. His parents apologized as soon as they entered our door.
Please stop. Come inside.
My father said and led the way into the living room. I had interacted with James' parents several times after our marriage, and I have the impression that they are a very polite couple. They are not strict, but they treated me as if I were their daughter. When James and I decided to live together, I went to talk to them. "I can't let you see your grandchildren." "I'm sorry." At that moment, my mother-in-law said,
"Karen and James, the best thing for both of you is to be happy, so don't worry about it."
I remember that she gave me a gentle hug. James' parents apologized to us again in the living room and explained what had led them to this point. About 2 weeks ago, James suddenly packed his bags and came home. When they asked him why, he didn't answer at first, but they became numb and forced him to ask, and found out about this incident. The two of them said, "We don't remember raising you to do such a thing to your own lifelong companion. You will never be allowed to come back to our house again," and they kicked him out. Still, they said they will keep a tight watch on James until he finishes paying me alimony. They also told me that he was now living alone in a small apartment near the office. I was very surprised that they kicked him out of the house, but I guess the two of them were also shocked by what had happened. James' father said, "Let us at least pay for the treatment as a way to make amends," and since he was not likely to leave until we agreed, we decided to indulge him there. Before leaving, the in-laws apologized profusely again, even at the entrance. "Dad, Mom, please don't apologize so much." After what happened with James, I thought I would never see them again, but I hoped that they would be happy for a long time longer. I hugged my mother-in-law. I was the one who comforted her then, but this time it was my turn to give my mother-in-law one last thank you. "Thank you, Mom, for all you have done for me. Please take care." I said this with a smile, and my mother-in-law burst into tears. I walked out the front door and saw them off until they were out of sight. They were truly kind people, I felt again. Later, the money for the treatment was transferred to my account as promised. I lived peacefully at my parents' house while using the money I received for my treatment, and my broken right arm healed completely. Looking back, my life with James was strange. As a housewife, he was everything to me, and I had no choice but to obey him. But the truth is that such a state of affairs is not married life. I had questioned it at times, but somewhere along the way I had felt that I had to obey James. When I moved back to my parents' house, I finally got rid of the poison of the time I spent with him. Now I'm working a new job part-time and looking for a partner to share my life with this time around. I live happily every day, savoring small joys. What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.